Previously on, Carlos Andriano, one of the most feared mafia bosses in the city, discovered he had a 6-year-old daughter he never knew existed. After abandoning his housemaid Stella when she became pregnant, he found her 6 years later running a small daycare center in Millbrook. Haunted by guilt and driven by a desire to be a father, Carlos made the ultimate choice. He defied his own father, Don Andriano, to protect Stella and their daughter, Sofia. The confrontation split the Andriano family. Don Andriano saw Sofia as a weakness that enemies could exploit and demanded Carlos eliminate the problem or return to the family. Instead, Carlos drew his weapon on his own father, declared Sofia under his protection, and evacuated Stella and Sofia to a secure compound. For 3 weeks, they've lived in hiding, armed guards, bulletproof windows, and a 6-year-old girl who's learning that home feels more like a prison. Carlos thought choosing his daughter would be enough to end the war with his father. He was wrong. Don Andriano doesn't forgive, he doesn't forget, and he's just made his next move.
Now, part 2. 3 weeks in the compound had turned Sofia into a different child. She didn't laugh as much, didn't run. She'd learned to recognize the sound of guards changing shifts, the click of locks engaging, the difference between friendly footsteps and dangerous ones. At 6 years old, she was developing the hyper-awareness Carlos had spent his whole life cultivating. It was destroying Stella. Carlos found her in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at nothing while cold coffee sat untouched beside her. The guards had learned not to interrupt these moments. She had them almost every night now. "She asked me today when we're going home," Stella said without looking up. "Not if, when. Like this is just a vacation that's lasted too long." Carlos sat across from her. The kitchen was sterile, industrial, nothing like Stella's cramped apartment with its refrigerator covered in Sofia's artwork. "We can't go back, not to Millbrook. My father knows. I know what your father knows." Her voice was flat, exhausted. "He knows where I lived, where I worked, where Sofia went to school. He knows everything because you spent 6 years ignoring us and 3 weeks turning us into prisoners." The words hit harder than any of his father's threats. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Stella laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about fair? Sofia draws pictures of houses with bars on the windows now. She thinks that's normal. Yesterday she asked Vincent if all little girls have bodyguards." Carlos had no answer for that. "This isn't a life," Stella continued. "This is a cage, a nicer cage than we had before, with armed guards instead of poverty, but it's still a cage. And the worst part is, I don't even blame you anymore. I blame myself for believing things could be different. They can be different. We just need time. Time for what? For your father to get bored? To forgive you?" She finally looked at him, and her eyes were hollow. "Men like your father don't forgive, Carlos. They don't forget. They wait. And while we're hiding in here, Sofia is losing her childhood." Carlos wanted to argue, to promise her it would get better, but the truth was suffocating. She was right. This wasn't sustainable. His father would keep applying pressure until something broke, and it wouldn't be Don Andriano who cracked first. "So what do you want me to do?" Carlos asked quietly. Stella stood, dumping her cold coffee in the sink. "I want you to figure out how to actually end this. Not postpone it, not hide from it. End it." She paused at the doorway. "Because if you can't, I'm taking Sofia and disappearing. For real this time. And you won't find us." She left him alone in the sterile kitchen, surrounded by armed guards and bulletproof windows, realizing that the compound wasn't protecting his family. It was suffocating them.
Marco Cola arrived at the shuttered daycare at exactly 10 a.m., driving a city vehicle that fooled no one. Carlos watched from across the street in an unmarked car, while Stella met him at the chain-link fence. He'd argued against her going, but she'd insisted. "It's my daycare," she'd said. "I'm not hiding anymore." Cola was 50s, soft around the middle, with the practiced smile of a man who'd spent his career bending rules for the right price. He carried a leather folder and gestured at the building like a concerned bureaucrat. Carlos couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched Stella's body language shift from tense to angry.
Cola pulled papers from his folder, pointing at specific sections. Stella shook her head. Cola's smile never wavered. After 10 minutes, Cola handed her a business card, tipped an imaginary hat, and drove away. Stella stood alone at the fence for a long moment before Carlos crossed the street. "Well?" he asked. "He says the building has structural deficiencies that make it unsafe for children. The city is prepared to condemn it and tear it down within 30 days. She handed him the documents Cola had given her. "Unless I agree to reopen under new management. He has investors who want to turn it into a community resource center." Carlos scanned the papers. The violations were fiction: cracked foundation, faulty electrical, inadequate fire exits. All easily disproven, but by the time Stella fought them in court, the building would be demolished. Classic intimidation. "These investors," Carlos said. "He give you names?" "Millbrook Community Development, LLC. Stella's voice was bitter. "I looked it up on my phone. Incorporated 3 weeks ago. No public information about ownership." 3 weeks, right when Carlos had split from his father. "It's him," Carlos said. "My father set this up. Cola's on his payroll." "I know." Stella pulled another paper from her purse, different from the ones Cola had given her. "I left his folder open while he was digging for his card. I took a photo." Carlos looked at the image on her phone. It was a bank transfer record. $20,000 from Andriano Holdings to an account in Cola's name, dated 2 days ago. His father hadn't even bothered to hide it well. He wanted Carlos to know. "He's not trying to launder money through the daycare," Carlos realized. "That's too small time for him. He's targeting it because it's yours, because he knows what it means to you." "So what do I do?" Stella asked. "Fight this in court for months while my life's work gets bulldozed? Or agree to let your father's people turn my daycare into whatever criminal operation they're planning?" Carlos stared at the building. Peeling paint, rusty fence, hand-painted sign. Stella had built this from nothing. It represented everything his father despised: independence, honest work, community. Of course he'd try to destroy it. "There's a third option," Carlos said slowly, "which is, we go to war, for real this time." Stella couldn't sleep that night. While Sofia and Carlos dozed in the hotel suite, she sat at the small desk with the photo she'd taken of Cola's folder, zooming in on every detail. There had to be more. Men like Cola didn't work for free, and her father-in-law, she caught herself, not father-in-law, Carlos's father, the man who wanted to destroy her. She enhanced the image, squinting at the edges where other papers were visible beneath the transfer record. A logo, partial text. She could make out Andriano Holdings and what looked like a routing number. But there was something else. She'd been so focused on the bank transfer that she'd missed the paper underneath it, a memo with the Andriano Holdings letterhead. Most of it was obscured, but 3 words were visible at the top. Phase 2, elimination. Her blood went cold. She zoomed in further, trying to make out more text, but the resolution broke down into pixels. Still, she could see fragments. Center demolition scheduled. Media coverage minimal. Subject will have no choice. Subject. They were talking about her like she was a target in an operation. Stella's hands shook as she screenshotted everything and sent it to her own email. Then she opened her laptop and started searching. Millbrook Community Development, LLC. Andriano Holdings. Marco Cola. What she found made her stomach turn. Cola had been a city inspector for 15 years with an unremarkable record until 3 years ago, when he suddenly bought a house in an expensive neighborhood. Public records showed the purchase price was $800,000, impossible on a city salary. The down payment came from a private loan through a company called Castellano Financial Services. Stella recognized the name. Castellano, the family Carlos had absorbed after their Dawn disappeared into the harbor. His words, not hers. She dug deeper. Castellano Financial Services had dissolved 2 years ago. Its assets transferred to a holding company. That holding company was owned by another shell corporation, and that shell corporation was owned by Andriano Holdings. Don Andriano had owned Marco Cola for 3 years. The daycare threats weren't opportunistic. They were planned. The old man had been positioning pieces on the board long before Carlos ever came back into her life, which meant Stella's breath caught, which meant Don Andriano had known about Sofia all along. She clicked through more records, her journalist instincts from a past life kicking in. Birth certificates were public record. She'd registered Sofia's birth in Millbrook General Hospital 6 years ago, listing father as unknown to protect herself. But a man with Don Andriano's resources wouldn't have needed a name. He could have searched hospital records for any baby born 9 months after Stella left his son's employment. He'd known. For years he'd known his son had a daughter, and he'd done nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because Sofia was leverage, an asset to be deployed when useful. And now she was useful. Stella stood so abruptly her chair scraped loud enough to wake Carlos. He bolted upright, hand moving toward his gun before he registered where he was. "What's wrong?" "Your father." Her voice shook with rage, not fear. "He's known about Sofia for years. This isn't about forcing you back into the family. It's about control. He's been watching us, waiting for the right moment to use her." Carlos was fully awake now. "What did you find?" She showed him everything, the shell companies, Cola's house, the timeline that proved Don Andriano had been tracking them long before the compound, before the reunion, possibly since the day Sofia was born. Carlos's face went white as he processed it. The laundering scheme, the daycare threats, it's all theater. He doesn't care about the building. "He cares about breaking me," Stella said, "about proving that everything I built only exists because he allowed it. And when it's gone, when I have nothing left, you'll have to choose between watching your daughter's mother destroyed or coming back to him. That's not going to happen. It already is happening." She pulled up the memo fragment again. Phase 2, elimination. "Carlos, what does that mean?" He stared at the word for a long time. "In family operations, elimination doesn't always mean killing. Sometimes it means erasing someone's entire existence, their business, their reputation, their ability to function independently. You make them disappear without actually making them disappear." "So she's going to erase me." "He's going to try." Carlos stood, pacing the small hotel room. But he made mistake. He documented it. These shell companies, the payments to Cola, the memo, this is evidence, real evidence. Stella understood what he was suggesting before he said it. "You want to go to the police." "Not the police, the feds." Carlos looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something other than guilt in his eyes. She saw purpose. "My father's been untouchable because he's careful. But this, coming after you, using city officials, creating paper trails, he's so confident he'll win that he got sloppy." "If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be testifying against your own father." "Good." Carlos's voice was cold. "Let me be very clear about something. That man stopped being my father the moment he threatened my daughter. Now he's just another criminal who needs to go to prison."
Carlos went to his father's mansion alone, against Stella's protests and Vincent's direct orders. He left his gun in the car, a gesture of peace that felt more like surrender, and walked through the iron gates he'd entered 1,000 times as a dutiful son. The guards recognized him, but didn't smile. They searched him anyway, professional and thorough, then escorted him to the study where Don Andriano held court. Some things never changed. His father sat behind the carved walnut desk, a tumbler of scotch in hand, looking exactly as he had 3 weeks ago. Powerful, immovable, utterly certain of his dominance. He didn't stand when Carlos entered. "I wondered when you'd come crawling back," Don Andriano said. "I'm not crawling, I'm asking." Carlos stayed near the door, maintaining distance. "Leave Stella alone. Leave the daycare alone. This is between us." His father laughed, that cold, mirthless sound Carlos had learned to fear as a child. "Between us. You made it about them when you chose a servant and her bastard over your family. Sofia is your granddaughter. Sofia is a mistake you made that I'm now forced to clean up." Don Andriano set down his glass with deliberate care. "You want me to leave them alone? Fine. Come back, resume your position, marry someone appropriate. We'll set the girl and her mother up somewhere comfortable. Out of state, generous monthly payments, no contact. Everyone wins." Carlos felt his jaw tighten. "You're asking me to abandon my daughter." "I'm asking you to be realistic. That child will never be accepted in our world. Neither will her mother. You're condemning them both to lives of danger and disappointment by keeping them close. The kind thing, the right thing, is to let them go." "The right thing?" Carlos couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "Like threatening to demolish the daycare? Like using Marco Cola to intimidate a single mother? That's your version of kindness?" Don Andriano's eyes narrowed. "So she found the paperwork. Smart girl. Smarter than I gave her credit for. Call off Cola. Stop the demolition. Let Stella rebuild her life." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm asking you to. Father to son, one last time." The old man stood slowly, moving around the desk with the deliberate menace of a predator circling prey. "You stopped being my son when you drew a gun on me. But I'm a forgiving man, so I'll give you one more chance. Walk away from them, today, right now, or I will systematically destroy everything that woman has built, everything she loves, until there's nothing left but ashes, and then I'll start on the girl." Carlos felt ice flood his veins. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" Don Andriano smiled. "I've eliminated entire families for lesser offenses. What makes you think a 6-year-old girl who shouldn't exist is somehow sacred? She's your blood. She's a liability." The old man returned to his chair, dismissing Carlos with a wave. "You walk out that door, you're declaring war, Carlos, and wars have casualties. Are you prepared to watch everyone you love become casualties?" Carlos met his father's eyes, those same dark Andriano eyes he saw in the mirror, in Sofia's face, and made his choice. "You already made them casualties when you threatened my daughter. I'm just deciding whether they die as victims or as soldiers." He left without waiting for a response. In the car, Vincent was on the phone, arguing with someone. He hung up when Carlos climbed in. "Boss, we've got a problem. 3 of our guys just got picked up on Old Warrants. Simultaneous arrests across the city." "Let me guess," Carlos said, starting the engine. "All arrests processed through judges my father has in his pocket." Vincent's silence was confirmation enough. "He's already moving," Carlos said, "stripping away our protection, isolating us. It's what he does. Eliminate variables before the main assault." "So what do we do?" Carlos pulled out his phone and called Stella. She answered on the first ring. "How fast can you gather everything you found on my father? Every document, every connection, every piece of evidence?" "Already done." "Why?" "Because we're not waiting for his next move." Carlos pulled onto the highway, heading away from the mansion, away from the compound, away from everything he'd known. "We're going to the FBI tonight."
The FBI field office in downtown was a concrete fortress that looked more like a prison than a place of justice. Carlos parked 3 blocks away, circling twice to check for tails before leading Stella and Sofia through a side entrance Vincent had scouted earlier. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over linoleum floors. A receptionist behind bulletproof glass looked up with practiced boredom until Carlos said the words Vincent had coached him to use. "I need to speak with someone about organized crime. I have information on the Andriano family." The boredom vanished. 10 minutes later, they sat in a windowless interview room across from 2 agents. Sarah Chen, mid-40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and Marcus Webb, younger, built like he played college football. Sophia sat between her parents, clutching her one-eared rabbit, confused about why they were in the police station, as she called it. "Before we start," Agent Chen said, sliding a card across the table, "I need to be clear about what you're doing here. Once you give us information, there's no taking it back. Witness protection is a possibility, but it's not a guarantee, and it's not a vacation. It's a complete life change." Carlos looked at Stella. They'd argued about this for 3 hours in the hotel room while Sophia slept. She'd wanted to run, take the cash Carlos had stashed, cross into Canada, disappear into a new life. He'd argued that running meant always looking over their shoulders, always waiting for his father's reach to find them. "Tell them," Stella said quietly. It wasn't encouragement. It was resignation. Agent Chen opened a file folder. Carlos Andriano, age 32, known associate of the Andriano crime family. Multiple investigations, no convictions. You're smart, you've been careful, and you've never testified against your organization. She leaned forward. So why now? Because my father threatened my daughter, Carlos said simply. Family disputes don't usually end up in FBI field offices. This isn't a dispute. Carlos pulled out his phone, opening the file Stella had compiled. My father is using a corrupt city official named Marco Cola to force my daughter's mother into laundering money through her daycare center. I have documents showing shell companies, payment records, and a memo that references Phase 2 elimination. Agent Webb took the phone, scrolling through the images. His expression shifted from skeptical to interested. This is Castellano Financial Services. We've been trying to connect that to the Andrianos for 2 years. It dissolved after my father absorbed the Castellano family operations. The assets transferred to Andriano Holdings through 3 intermediary corporations. I can give you the entire paper trail. Chen and Webb exchanged a glance. What else can you give us? Chen asked. This was it. The moment where Carlos became something he'd sworn he'd never be. An informant. A rat. In his father's world, there was no lower form of life. But in Sophia's world, the world he wanted her to grow up in, maybe being a rat was better than being a monster. Everything, Carlos said. 15 years of operations, money laundering routes, corrupt officials on the payroll, unsolved murders I have direct knowledge of, locations of bodies, names of witnesses you thought were dead. I can give you enough to dismantle the entire organization. And in exchange, protection for Stella and Sophia, full immunity for me on anything except direct homicides, which I'll testify to honestly. And I want my father arrested before he can retaliate. Agent Chen leaned back, studying him. You understand what you're offering to do. You'll be testifying against your own blood. Your father, your uncles, soldiers you grew up with. Everyone you've ever known will want you dead. They already want me dead, Carlos said. This way, at least my daughter gets to grow up. Mommy, I'm hungry, Sophia whispered, tugging on Stella's sleeve. The sound of his daughter's voice in an FBI interrogation room, innocent, oblivious to the weight of what was happening, broke something in Carlos. She should be at the daycare, playing with other kids, learning to read, living a normal life, not hiding in safe houses or sitting in federal buildings while his father bargained away his soul. Stella pulled a granola bar from her purse, unwrapping it quietly. Agent Chen watched the interaction with something that might have been sympathy. I have children, Chen said. 2 boys. I understand what you're trying to protect, but I need to know you're committed to this, because once we move, your father will know you cooperated. There's no halfway here. Carlos thought about the compound, the suffocating security, Sophia's drawings of houses with bars on windows. He thought about Stella's exhausted eyes and her threat to disappear with his daughter if he couldn't end this. He thought about his father's cold promise. I will systematically destroy everything that woman has built until there's nothing left but ashes. I'm committed, Carlos said. Tell me what you need. Agent Webb pulled out a legal pad. Start with Marco Cola. Every interaction, every payment, every communication. Then we'll move to the shell companies. This is going to take days, maybe weeks. Your family needs to stay in protective custody during that time. We have a safe location. Not good enough, Chen interrupted. If you're serious about this, we control the security. Federal safe house, rotating agents, no contact with anyone from your previous life. That means your soldiers, your accountant, anyone connected to the family. You're in our world now. Carlos looked at Stella again. She was helping Sophia with the granola bar, wiping crumbs from her daughter's chin, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in an insane situation. Okay, he said. Where do we start? Agent Chen smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered dangerous prey. We start by making your father think everything is normal. You go back to your safe house, maintain your routine, give us 72 hours to prepare arrest warrants and tactical teams. Get you do that without tipping him off? He already knows I came here. How? Because he has people everywhere. City cops, court clerks, probably a few federal employees. He'll know I walked into this building within the hour. Webb swore under his breath. Chen's expression hardened. Then we don't have 72 hours. We have maybe 24 before he moves against you. She stood abruptly. I'm activating protective custody right now. You don't leave this building. We'll send a team to collect whatever you need from your location. What about my men? Carlos asked. The ones who sided with me. My father will kill them. We can offer them the same deal if they cooperate. They won't. They're loyal. Then they made their choice. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. I'm sorry, but you need to understand something. We're here to build a case against your father, not to protect everyone in your orbit. You want to save your daughter? That we can do. But we're not the Andriano Family Protection Service. The door closed, leaving them alone in the windowless room. Sophia had finished her snack and was humming softly, swinging her legs under the chair. I'm scared, Stella whispered. Me too, Carlos admitted. Do you think this will work? He wanted to say yes, wanted to promise her that the FBI would swoop in, arrest his father, and they'd all live happily ever after in witness protection with new names and a house with a white picket fence. But he'd spent his whole life learning that promises were just pretty lies. I think it's our only chance, he said instead. And for now, that would have to be enough.
The federal safe house was a suburban ranch in a neighborhood so aggressively normal it felt like a movie set. Minivans and driveways, basketball hoops over garages, a mailbox shaped like a barn. 2 agents in an unmarked car sat across the street, pretending to read newspapers like it was 1985. Carlos spent 18 hours a day in the dining room, which had been converted into a makeshift war room. Laptops, file boxes, recording equipment, and 3 federal prosecutors who rotated shifts asking him variations of the same questions over and over. Walk me through the Castellano absorption again. Who authorized the hit on Judge Morrison? These account numbers, which ones are active, which are dormant? Stella sat in the living room with Sophia, trying to maintain some routine. Coloring books, educational videos on an iPad, stories before nap time. But Carlos could see the strain in her face every time she looked at him through the doorway, watching him dissect his father's empire piece by piece. On the 3rd day, Agent Chen brought in Marcus, the accountant who'd helped Carlos launder money through the charitable foundation, the same foundation where he'd first seen Stella and Sophia on that news segment. Marcus looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled suit, eyes red from lack of sleep. He'd been picked up at his apartment at 5 a.m. with a warrant and a choice, cooperate or face 20 years for financial crimes. You brought him here? Carlos asked Chen quietly. He corroborates your timeline and has access to documents you don't. We need both of you. She paused. Unless there's a problem. There were 100 problems. Marcus knew things Carlos had hoped to keep buried, knew about contracts Carlos had authorized, payments Carlos had signed off on, decisions that would make him look less like a reluctant participant and more like an active architect of his father's crimes. But there was no clean exit from a dirty life. No problem, Carlos said. Marcus sat across from him, hands shaking slightly as he opened his laptop. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know they were coming for me. I would have warned you. It's fine. You made the right choice. Did I? Marcus laughed bitterly. My sister called me a traitor. My brother won't return my calls. My mother hung up crying when I told her I was testifying against the family. Carlos knew that feeling. He hadn't told his mother what he was doing. Couldn't stomach that conversation. But he'd seen the news reports. Don Adriano's allies were already spinning the narrative. Carlos had gone insane, kidnapped his illegitimate child, and was trying to extort the family for money. It was masterful propaganda. Show them the shell companies, Chen instructed. Start with Castellano Financial. For the next 6 hours, Marcus walked them through a labyrinth of corporate structures so complex it required flowcharts. Money from drug operations flowed into real estate investments, which generated legitimate income, which funded political donations, which bought protection from prosecution. The genius of it was the scale.
No single transaction was large enough to trigger federal scrutiny. "Your father's brilliant," one of the prosecutors admitted grudgingly. "This is 40 years of meticulous planning." "He's brilliant until he's arrogant. Going after Stella was arrogance. He got so confident in his control that he documented everything, made it personal instead of professional." Agent Webb entered with a thick folder. "Speaking of personal, we found the full memo, the one Stella photographed." He spread papers across the table. Phase 2 Elimination was the header, and beneath it a detailed plan to destroy Stella's life. Carlos read it with growing horror. The daycare was just the beginning. Don Andriano had planned to tank her credit score through fraudulent accounts, file false police reports to get her investigated for child endangerment, leak manufactured evidence of drug use to family courts. The goal was to have Sofia removed from Stella's custody and placed with appropriate family members, meaning Don Andriano himself.
"He was going to take Sofia," Carlos said numbly. "And make it look legal," Webb confirmed. "Judges on his payroll, social workers he'd compromised, documentation showing Stella as an unfit mother. By the time she fought it in court, he'd have had custody for months. Parental alienation would have done the rest." Stella appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening. Her face was white. "He was going to steal my daughter." "He was going to steal our daughter," Carlos corrected, "and probably convince her I was dead or dangerous, rewrite her entire history." Sofia's voice drifted from the living room, singing along to some cartoon. Innocent, oblivious, exactly how his father wanted to keep her, oblivious to her real mother, her real history, her real name. "This is enough," Chen said decisively. "We have financial crimes, witness tampering, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and about 40 other charges. Judge Brennan will sign arrest warrants tonight. We move tomorrow at dawn." "My father doesn't sleep at the mansion anymore," Carlos said. "Not since I left. He moves between 3 locations, changes his pattern daily. You'll need exact intel or he'll disappear." "Can you get that intel?" Carlos thought about his remaining soldiers, the ones who'd stayed loyal to Don Andriano. Most would die before betraying the old man. But there was one, Tommy, his father's driver for 15 years, who'd occasionally shown Carlos photos with a grandfather's pride. "Maybe," Carlos said, "but it would need to make a call, and it would burn the only bridge I have left." Chen's expression was merciless. "Then start burning." That night, Carlos sat in the backyard of the safe house, if you could call the 10 by 10 square of grass a yard, and dialed Tommy's number. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "You got some nerve calling me. I need to know where he's sleeping tonight." Silence. Then, "You're working with the feds. I'm protecting my daughter. By destroying your family. By stopping my father from stealing her." Carlos closed his eyes. "Tommy, you have a granddaughter, Emily, right? 8 years old, loves soccer, wants to be a veterinarian. You showed me pictures at the Christmas party. Don't you dare. I'm not threatening her. I'm asking you to imagine someone trying to take her from your daughter. Imagine someone with enough power and money to make it legal, to make it look like your daughter was the problem. Now imagine you could stop it, but it would cost you everything." Another long silence. Carlos could hear breathing, could almost hear Tommy's internal war. "The East Estate," Tommy said finally. "He's been staying there since you left. Security's doubled. He's not taking chances." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. And Carlos, when this is over, if you survive, don't ever contact me again. As far as I'm concerned, you died the day you walked into that FBI building." The line went dead. Carlos sat in the dark, listening to Sofia's laughter through the window, as Stella read her a bedtime story. Tomorrow, federal agents would storm his father's estate. Tomorrow, the Andriano empire would begin to crumble. Tomorrow, he would officially become an orphan, a traitor, a man without a family name. But tonight, he could hear his daughter laughing. And maybe that was enough.
The news broke at 6 a.m. FBI raids Andriano estate, organized crime boss facing federal charges. By 8 a.m., Stella's phone was exploding with messages from mothers whose children attended the daycare. By 10 a.m., someone had leaked that Marco Cola was cooperating with investigators and had implicated Don Andriano in the scheme to condemn the building. By noon, there were protesters outside City Hall. Stella watched the coverage from the safe house, hardly believing what she was seeing. Dozens of people, mothers, fathers, community members, holding signs, "Save Sophia's place," "Our children need this center," "Justice for working families." Mrs. Chen from next door to her old apartment was being interviewed by a local reporter. "That daycare saved my life. I was working 3 jobs, couldn't afford proper childcare. Stella gave my kids a safe place when nobody else would. And now we find out the city was trying to tear it down for some criminal scheme? That's not right." More people joined throughout the day. By evening, the crowd had swelled to over 200. Someone had printed professional signs. A local pastor brought a sound system. This wasn't just a protest anymore. It was a movement. "They're doing this for you," Carlos said, standing behind Stella as they watched the news. "They're doing it for their children," Stella corrected, but her voice broke. "I never thought. I was just trying to help people." Agent Chen appeared with an update. "The community response is helping us. The mayor's office is scrambling. They can't afford to look like they sided with organized crime against working mothers. Cola's already thrown 2 other city officials under the bus to save himself. The whole corruption network is unraveling." "What about Don Andriano?" Carlos asked. "Still in custody. Bail hearing is tomorrow, but with the federal charges and flight risk assessment, he's not going anywhere. Your testimony is scheduled for the grand jury next week." Carlos nodded, trying to process that his father was actually behind bars. It didn't feel real yet. The next morning, Stella made a decision. "I want to go there, to the protest." "Absolutely not," Chen said immediately. "You're in protective custody. The fewer people who know your location, those people are fighting for my daycare. They deserve to see that I'm fighting too." Stella's voice was firm. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I'm going." Carlos recognized that tone. It was the same one she'd used when telling him she wouldn't let Sophia be treated with less than she deserved. "I'll go with her," he said to Chen. "Full security detail. We're in and out in 30 minutes. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, then sighed. "If Don Andriano's people make a move, they won't. Not in front of cameras and 200 witnesses." Carlos hoped he was right. 2 hours later, Stella stood on the City Hall steps with a microphone someone thrust into her hands. Sophia stayed in the car with 3 agents, watching her mother on a tablet screen. 6 years ago, Stella began, her voice shaking but strong. "I was alone, pregnant, and terrified. I had nothing. This community gave me a chance to build something, not just for my daughter, but for every parent who's been told they don't matter, that their children don't matter." The crowd roared approval. "They tried to take it away using lies and corruption, but you showed up, you fought back, and now the whole city knows you can't destroy people who refuse to be destroyed." More cheers, chants of "Stella, Stella," that made her eyes fill with tears. Carlos watched from the car, his daughter beside him, and realized something. His father had spent 40 years building an empire through fear and violence. Stella had built something stronger in 6 years, using nothing but compassion and determination. And compassion was winning. The arrest had been clean, too clean. Federal agents had surrounded the East Estate at dawn. Don Andriano had surrendered without resistance, and he'd been sitting in federal custody for 3 days without saying a word to investigators. No demands for lawyers, no threats, no rage. It made Carlos nervous. "He's planning something," Carlos told Agent Chen on the 4th day. "My father doesn't surrender, he adapts." "He's in a federal holding facility with 24-hour surveillance. What's he going to do?" Carlos wished he knew. The answer came that afternoon. Chen burst into the safe house, phone pressed to her ear, face grim. "Your father's attorney just filed a motion for a meeting. He's requesting to see you, face to face. Says he has information about additional criminal activities, but he'll only share it with you present." "It's a trap," Stella said immediately. "Obviously," Chen agreed. "But if he's offering information that could implicate other family members, we have to take the meeting. Federal prosecutor will be there, recording equipment, guards. He can't touch you." Carlos understood what his father was doing.
The old man knew the case against him was solid. Marcus's testimony, the financial records, the memo about Sophia. He was going to prison. But he wanted one last chance to break his son, to reassert control, to prove that even behind bars, Don Andriano was still the patriarch. "I'll do it," Carlos said. "Carlos, no," Stella started. "He needs to see that I'm not afraid anymore, that he lost." Carlos looked at her. "And I need to see it too." The federal detention center was concrete and fluorescent lights, designed to strip away any sense of dignity or power. But when Carlos entered the small meeting room, Don Adriano somehow still commanded the space. He sat in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed to the table, but his posture was ramrod straight, his expression imperious. "You look terrible," his father said, by way of greeting. "Freedom doesn't suit you." Carlos sat across from him, Agent Chen flanking him, and a federal prosecutor. "You wanted to talk. Talk. I wanted to see if you'd actually come, if you had the spine to look me in the eye after what you've done." Don Adriano leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed. "You destroyed everything. 40 years of building this family, and you tore it down in 3 weeks. You destroyed it yourself when you threatened Sophia. That little bastard, she's not even—" Don Andriano caught himself, aware of the recording equipment. "You threw away your birthright for a child who'll never be accepted in our world. Good. Your world is poison." His father's expression hardened. "You think you've won? You think because I'm in here, you're safe?" He laughed, that cold, terrible sound. "I have 30 soldiers still loyal to me. I have judges, politicians, police captains who owe me favors going back decades. I have money hidden in places the feds will never find. And I have time." "Your time is over," Carlos said quietly. "Time is all I have now. Years to plan, years to watch you try to build a normal life with that woman and her child. Years to wait for the moment when you let your guard down, when you think you're finally safe. And then I'll remind you that blood doesn't forget, that family is forever, that you can betray me, humiliate me, put me in a cage, but you can never escape being my son."
Agent Chen stood. "This meeting is over. You offered information, Mr. Andriano. Either provide it or we're done." "I did provide information." Don Andriano kept his eyes locked on Carlos. "I informed my son that his betrayal has consequences that will outlive us both, that his daughter will grow up knowing her father destroyed his own family, that eventually she'll ask questions about who we are, what we were, and she'll realize she's an Andriano, which means she's capable of the same darkness I am, the same darkness you are, Carlos." "Sophia is nothing like us," Carlos said, but his voice wavered. "She has our blood, our eyes, our instincts." His father leaned back, satisfied. "You can change her name, move her across the country, raise her in some suburban paradise, but eventually she'll wonder why other children don't have armed guards, why her father can't talk about his past, why everyone's always afraid. And that curiosity will become anger, and that anger will become who she is." Carlos felt his chest tighten. He'd had the same fears during sleepless nights in the compound, watching Sophia adapt too quickly to violence and security protocols. What if his father was right? What if the damage was already done? Then he remembered something Stella had said weeks ago, after Sophia had asked about her father for the 100th time. What matters isn't where we come from, it's what we choose to become. Carlos stood, looking down at his father for what he knew would be the last time. "You're wrong. Sophia isn't defined by your blood or your crimes. She's defined by a mother who survived everything you tried to do to her, by a community that fought for what was right, by people who proved that compassion is stronger than fear." "Naive," Don Andriano spat. "Maybe, but I'd rather be naive and free than right and in chains." Carlos turned toward the door, then paused. "You asked if I had the spine to look you in the eye. I did. And you know what I saw? A pathetic old man who destroyed everything he loved because he was too proud to admit he was wrong." "I'll see you again, son.
Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but eventually. No, you won't. Carlos's voice was final. Because I'm not your son anymore. I'm Sofia's father, and that's the only family name that matters. He walked out without looking back. In the hallway, Stella waited with Sofia, who had been playing in a visitor's area with the children's book. His daughter looked up when he approached, smiled that gap-toothed smile, and reached for his hand. "Did you finish your meeting, Daddy?" "Yeah, maybe. I finished." "Can we go get ice cream now? Mama said maybe." Carlos looked at Stella, who nodded. Agent Shen would have a security detail follow them, and there were still threats to manage, testimony to give, years of looking over their shoulders. His father was right about one thing. Consequences didn't end just because someone went to prison. But in that moment, holding his daughter's hand, planning something as simple as ice cream on a Tuesday afternoon, Carlos felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. "Yeah," he said, lifting Sofia onto his shoulders as her delighted laughter echoed through the sterile hallway. "We can definitely get ice cream."
6 months later, the daycare reopened on a Saturday morning in May. The building looked different. Fresh paint, Sofia had picked the color, a cheerful yellow that made the whole block brighter. New playground equipment, donated by local businesses after the publicity around Don Andriano's arrest. A mural on the side wall, painted by community volunteers, showing children of every background playing together under the words "Sofia's Place," where every child matters. Stella stood at the gate, watching families arrive for the grand reopening celebration. Faces she recognized from 6 years of struggle, plus new ones drawn by the media coverage. They came with potluck dishes and hand-painted welcome signs, transforming the yard into something that felt more like a family reunion than a business launch. Carlos hung back near the building, less comfortable with crowds now. Testifying against his father had made him a target, not just from remaining Andriano loyalists, but from other crime families who saw him as proof that no one could be trusted. Federal protection had helped, but the real protection came from something unexpected: community support. The neighborhood had adopted him, not because they forgave what he'd been, but because they saw what he was trying to become. He'd spent the last 6 months doing construction work on the daycare, showing up at community meetings, learning the names of the kids who'd be attending, small acts of normalcy that felt monumental after a lifetime of violence. "You did good work on the roof," Mrs. Chen said, appearing beside him with a plate of dumplings. "No leaks during last week's storm." "I watched a lot of YouTube videos," Carlos admitted. She laughed. "My husband says you're a natural. He wants to know if you'd help him with his garage next month." "Yeah, I'd like that." It still felt surreal, being invited to help with garages, being offered dumplings, being treated like a person instead of a threat. But Stella had been right. What mattered wasn't where you came from, but what you chose to become. Sofia ran past, chasing another girl her age, both shrieking with laughter. She'd started public school 2 months ago, first time in a real classroom, sitting with other kids, learning to read and make friends without armed guards watching from the corners. The nightmares had mostly stopped. She still asked occasional questions about the bad time, but they were becoming less frequent, replaced by normal 6-year-old concerns like homework and making the soccer team. "Speech time," Stella said, appearing at her elbow. She wore jeans and a Sofia's Place t-shirt someone had made, her hair pulled back practically, looking nothing like the terrified woman who'd shown up at his penthouse with an ultrasound image. She looked strong, free. "You're doing the speech, right?" Carlos asked. "We're doing the speech. Stella, these people don't want to hear from me. These people want to hear from the man who helped rebuild their community center, who showed up every day for 6 months with a hammer and actually learned how to use it, who proved that people can change." She took his hand. "Come on." They walked to the small stage someone had constructed from plywood. The crowd quieted. Sofia pushed to the front, standing with Mrs. Chen, beaming at her parents with pride that made Carlos's chest hurt. Stella spoke first, thanking everyone for their support, for fighting when the city tried to shut them down, for proving that community was stronger than corruption. Her voice was steady, confident,
the voice of someone who'd survived and come out stronger. Then she handed the microphone to Carlos.
He looked at the faces watching him, some wary, some openly curious, some warm with acceptance he hadn't earned yet. He thought about his father, sitting in federal prison, still believing that blood and violence were the only things that mattered, still convinced that Carlos would eventually return to the darkness. "I'm not good at speeches," Carlos started. "Where I come from, we didn't talk much. We gave orders or followed them. Everything was about power and control and never showing weakness." Some nodding in the crowd. They'd seen the news coverage, knew who he'd been. "But my daughter taught me something. She taught me that asking questions isn't weakness, that needing help isn't failure, that building something together is stronger than taking something alone." He found Sophia in the crowd. "This place, this community, you saved my family when I didn't know how to save them myself. And I know I can't undo what I was, can't erase the name I carried or the things I did, but I can try to build something better." He handed the microphone back to Stella, feeling inadequate and exposed, but she squeezed his hand and whispered, "Perfect." The applause was genuine, if cautious. He'd take it. Later, after the crowds had thinned and Sophia was showing off her classroom to the last few stragglers, Carlos found himself in the daycare library, a small room he'd built from scratch, installing shelves and painting alphabet letters on the walls. Stella joined him, carrying 2 paper cups of punch. "She wants you to read to her group tomorrow, Tuesday afternoon story time." "I'm not good at reading." "You're her father. That makes you good enough." Stella sat beside him on the small bench designed for 6-year-olds, their knees almost to their chests. "The prosecutor called. Your father's appeal was denied. He's looking at 25 years minimum." Carlos absorbed that. 25 years. Don Andriano would be 92 when he got out, if he lived that long. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel like Sophia's safe. That's all that matters." She paused. "How do you feel?" "Complicated, relieved, guilty, orphaned, free. I don't know yet." "That's okay. You don't have to know." Through the window they could see Sophia teaching another girl how to properly kick a soccer ball, patient and encouraging, exactly like she'd been that first day Carlos had watched her from across the street, 7 months ago, a lifetime ago. "Do you think she'll remember the compound, the guards, the fear, all of it?" "Maybe. Probably. But she'll also remember this." Stella gestured at the library, the mural visible through the window, the community that had rallied around them. "She'll remember that when things were bad, people showed up, that we fought for something better, that her parents chose her over everything else." "I should have chosen her 6 years ago." "You can't change 6 years ago. You can only build today." Stella stood, offering her hand. "Come on. Your daughter wants to show you the art project she made. It's a family portrait. You, me, her, and approximately 40 cats she wishes we owned." Carlos took her hand, letting her pull him up. Through the window, Sophia waved enthusiastically, nearly dropping her soccer ball in her excitement. He'd spent 32 years learning how to be his father's son, how to intimidate, control, destroy. Now he was learning something harder, how to be Sophia's father, how to read picture books with funny voices, how to braid hair badly, how to show up at school events and pack lunches and teach her that strength didn't mean violence. It wasn't redemption. He'd done too much, hurt too many people, carried too much blood on his hands for redemption. But maybe, if he worked hard enough, showed up every day, kept choosing his daughter over the darkness, maybe it was enough. Maybe being enough was its own kind of freedom. He followed Stella outside, where Sophia grabbed both their hands and dragged them toward her masterpiece, chattering about the purple cat she'd drawn that was definitely the most important one, Daddy, because purple is magic. And for the first time in his life, Carlos Andriano wasn't afraid of tomorrow.
The end. If you made it this far, you've witnessed Carlos Andriano's journey from ruthless mafia boss to a father learning what family truly means. This story reminds us that our past doesn't define our future. Our choices do. What did you think of part 2? Did Carlos make the right choice? Could his father ever truly be defeated? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss any of our powerful stories about redemption, courage, and the strength it takes to change. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.